So like you saw, we're looking at the philosopher Perictone, who's a woman that we don't really know anything about. We just have this text with her name on it, and then from the dialect of Greek in which it's written, from the content of it, we can kind of place approximately the time in which she lived. And so we don't know much about who she is, but this text is very helpful because it just concisely kind of gives you the outlook on what wisdom is that mainstream ancient philosophy has. She puts it all in one place very concisely, kind of lets you know, hey, this is the basic view. Let's begin with Parmenides and review this a little bit because Parmenides' notion of being is going to be key to understanding Perictone. Parmenides in his poem has the goddess lay out these two ways of inquiry, what seem like two possible ways we could go. Assume that something is, assume that a thing, whatever the thing is we're talking about, it is, or assume that it's not. Right? So assume that a thing, and again, that could be anything we're talking about, whether it's reality as a whole, or whether it's, this little pencil I'm holding up on the screen, right? Whatever it is, assume that it is, or assume that it's not. And to give a concrete example of that, whenever we looked at a unicorn. So this is a fictional creature. So we can assume a unicorn is, meaning it is something, right? It's a fictional creature, it's a unicorn, and so on. Or we could assume a unicorn is not something, like is not anything. But that second way just doesn't work, right? I can't even, if it's really not anything at all, I don't even know what we're talking about, right? I can't even conceptualize that. We really can't even talk about it for the same thing as for thinking and for being. That's what the goddess said. So this idea of being, where anything that we can talk about at all, or conceptualize at all, or think about at all, is, right? It exists or is in this kind of broad sense. So unicorn is. Now, obviously unicorns, it's a fictional creature, right? It doesn't exist out in the world that we perceive, but it is a fictional creature. And so we want to say like a unicorn is on this Parmenidean view. It has being. It just has a certain kind of being, fictional being. And this would work even if we're talking about reality as such, right? So what is reality itself, the whole of reality? Right, so we can assume, hey, there is a reality, like a reality or an objective truth or being. Or we can assume that there is not an absolute objective reality, truth, or being. But the second way of inquiry just doesn't work. Anytime that I'm going to say, hey, there is no absolute truth, I'm going to assume there is no absolute truth. Well, by making that statement, I'm saying it's true, absolutely, that there's no absolute truth, right? Or, hey, there is no reality. What am I saying when I say there is no reality? I'm saying it's really true that there is no reality. There really is no reality. In reality, there is no reality, right? And that's a contradiction, right? That doesn't make any sense. We're just kind of getting confused in our language there if we're going to talk that way. So, yeah, it's almost just by the way thinking operates, the way when we think, when we speak, when we're trying to conceptualize things, we've got to assume that there is a reality that we're talking about, right? Or a truth that we're talking about. There's something true out there. So, yeah, in this sense, we're stuck with the first way, right? The first way of inquiry, which is where we have to assume there is an absolute objective reality, being, or truth. Now, let's move to Perictone now. So let's start here, right? I've already said Perictone very concisely states the mainstream view of ancient philosophy, but she's also stating a view that's present in a lot of different traditions. So it's this point that she starts out her little text on wisdom there with, that a lot of different traditions would agree with. Humankind has come into being and exists in order to contemplate the order of the nature of the whole. What does this mean? By the whole, she doesn't just mean the universe, right, what physics study. We're not just talking about this universe that we live in, but we're talking about all of being. That's what she means by the whole. Everything that is, meaning everything we can possibly conceptualize or talk about. That's really the whole, because that's the whole of reality. Because reality includes things that are just real to me or you, like fictional creatures or images, right? Those are still part of reality in the wide sense. They're not part of the of the physical universe, but they're part of reality. Right? So if I have an idea, I close my eyes and I imagine a horse. Well, that horse that I'm imagining, right, that image in my mind is part of reality. That's real. There really is an image in my mind. It's not that horse I'm imagining is not something that's out there in the physical world, but it's still something that's real. I mean, same with the unicorn, right? I close my eyes, I picture a unicorn. That image of the unicorn is real. Unicorns aren't out there in the physical universe, but they're still part of reality because fictional creatures, imagination, all of that is still part of reality. It's part of what we can talk about and what we can conceptualize. And so that's what she means by the whole. So when she's saying humankind has come into being and exists in order to contemplate the order of the nature of the whole. So everything that's real in this Parmenidean sense, everything that we can talk about or think about at all, humankind, on her view, has come into being to contemplate, to see the order in the nature of that complete reality, right? Like how these different aspects of it are all related. And how fictional creatures are related to physical beings and so on. Anything like that. That's what, on her view, humankind has come into being to contemplate. So again, this is kind of just to solidify this point. The whole is everything about which true things can be said. Because everything about which true things can be said is. So that's going to include everything in our universe that has been, is now, or will be. Everything that could be in every possible universe. All arithmetical truths, all possible fictional beings, and so on and so forth. Right? Anything that we can talk about at all is what she means by, is what's included in the whole for her. Now, there's a lot of traditions, like I said, that more or less agree with her on this, and on this idea that this is the purpose of human life, right? This is why humans have come into being, is to contemplate the order of the nature of the whole. So many major thinkers would agree with her on this. Mainstream ancient Greek and Roman philosophy, so Pythagoras and the Pythagoreans would agree with this, Parmenides and his followers, Plato and Platonists, Aristotle, Aristotelians, Neoplatonists. These kind of major schools of ancient Greek thought would agree with her on that point, that that's what humans are here to do. They're here to contemplate the order of the nature of the whole. In the Middle Ages, most mainstream Jewish, Christian, and Muslim philosophers would agree with her on this. And the reason for that is because most of the mainstream medieval Jewish, Christian, Islamic philosophers were all either Platonists or Aristotelians or some combination of both, right? They take the mainstream ancient Greek philosophical view and sort of use that to try to interpret their religious traditions. So they would agree with her. In modern philosophy, you'd also get a lot of people who would more or less be on the same page as Perictone. So people like Spinoza, Leibniz, Hegel, mainstream Catholic and traditional Christian philosophers, mainstream secular, non-religious followers of ancient Greek philosophy. And this is just to name a few of kind of major modern and contemporary figures and schools of thought that would be in basic agreement with Perictone. And also, if we go outside of sort of the Western tradition, Asian philosophy and religion, Hinduism would basically be in agreement with her, and generally Hindu philosophy would be, and some forms of Buddhist philosophy would also be. Okay, so we got a lot of people who agree with what she's saying, but this philosophy, so we ask, well, is it true, right? Maybe all those people are wrong. Humankind has come into being and exists in order to contemplate the order of the nature of the whole. Is this true? In a way, I'm going to kind of put off completely answering this question. I mean, I think it's true, but right, like you need to figure out for yourself whether it's true. We can kind of put it off, though, because later in this course, we're going to read Aristotle, and he's going to give you like a much longer defense of this view, right? He's going to, instead of just saying it, he's going to give you an argument that really supports it, that the point, the ultimate purpose of human life is contemplation. So to contemplate the nature of the order of the whole, that's the purpose of human life. So instead of kind of focusing on the purpose of human life right now, let's focus on what she's saying wisdom is. So she goes on to say, the proper work of wisdom is, first, to possess the order of the nature of the whole, and second, to contemplate the purpose of the things that are. So what does she mean by that? Because this is what wisdom would be, as she's defining it. So wisdom would possess the order of the nature of the whole. Right? You'd have that as something that you understood. You know how all being, all of reality, in any sense, like all of it fits together, right? How that order of it. So a wise person would have that, right? They would know how fictional being relates to physical being, relates to emotions, you kind of have the basic structure of that whole. That's what the wise person would have. And the wise person would contemplate the purpose of the things that are. So that's what she's claiming. Now, one immediate thing you might be kind of troubled with here is that, wait, she's assuming that there is a purpose to the things that are, right? I mean, she seems to be assuming reality has a purpose, things that are have purpose. She's kind of actually saying everything has a purpose, right? Because to contemplate the purpose of the things that are literally anything we can talk about or think about. So literally everything we can talk about or think about must have a purpose. I mean, that's assumed in what she's saying. But is that true, right? Does everything really have a purpose? Aren't there things that are purposeless, pointless? What does she mean by this? So one thing we'd have to ask, what does she mean by a purpose? And what I want to suggest is what she means by that is the role that a thing plays in the larger system that it's part of. So let's start to think about this. Does everything have a purpose? If by a purpose we mean the role the thing plays in a larger system that it's part of. So I can start with, on my desk I have, a pen sitting here. So a pen. Does a pen have a purpose? You go like, okay, yeah, obviously a pen have a purpose. It has a role to play. That's role in the system of human life that it's a part of. It's a human artifact, something that humans invented. And it plays a role to write on, paper or whatever we're writing on. So it has a certain role. So a pen has a purpose. But you might go, okay, yeah, obviously a pen has a purpose. But what about something like humans themselves? Do they have a purpose? And again, I would want to say, yeah, we have to clarify what we're talking about. When we say humans, what do we mean? Do we mean them as a biological species of animals? Because then they have the same purpose that other animals have, which is to, speaking biologically, right, to reproduce and to survive and to flourish biologically, to be healthy, right? Those are all different purposes of human life. She's saying, hey, as beings that have the capacity to understand, we have this purpose to understand things. But yeah, if we clarify, what do we mean by a human being exactly? Do we mean, hey, I'm a kind of animal? Well, as an animal, I have the purpose of flourishing, being happy, reproducing, right? Whatever you want to talk about there. It seems like we can identify plenty of roles that we play. If we talk about me as a professor, let's say, or you as a student, we have an even more defined purpose, right? Like my purpose as a professor is to teach, as a philosophy professor, is to teach philosophy. That's the role that I play in this system that I'm a professor in. Your purpose as a student, right, if we're just considering you as a student, is to learn, right? That's the role that you're playing within this system. So with humans, I think the reason why it's kind of complicated is because with a pen, at least when we're normally thinking of a pen, we just identified it as having one purpose, right? Its purpose is to write with things. And of course, if we could see it as having other purposes, right? Like let's say I throw it at you, to hit you. Well, then I'm using it for a different purpose. So a pen can have multiple purposes too, but it's kind of got that one specific purpose that's pretty obvious. Where with humans, we've got a whole bunch of different purposes. So that's why it's a little bit confusing. A human maybe it has one overall purpose, but it has like multiple purposes within that. And it's less clear which one of the purposes is the overall purpose of human life. So with humans, again, is there a purpose for humans? Well, yeah, there's a lot of different purposes for humans, right? The purpose for me as a human professor is to teach. The purpose of you as a human student is to learn. The purpose of me as a biological organism is to grow up to be, full grown, to reproduce, survive, be healthy. At this purely biological level. We have as a citizen, my purpose is to, in a democratic society, help play my role in the government by doing things like voting, being civically active, right? So I can tell you all kinds of different purposes that human beings have. But what about other things, right? So we're talking about humans, we talked about pens. What about a horse? Does a horse have a purpose? Again, yeah, I would say sure, a horse has a purpose, right? Again, we could define that purpose biologically. Its purpose of a horse is to grow to be a horse, to survive, to fit that niche within its environment, that if you want to talk about evolution as made for it. And so its purpose is to kind of be a horse and live a horse life. That's the purpose of a horse. Right, and that's a purpose that it has regardless of any other purpose. Its purpose might be for me to ride on it. Well, that's not a purpose that the horse has for itself, but that's one that I can use it for, right? Again, things that have multiple purposes, that's fine. What about the purpose of something like just a number, like the number 1, like an abstract entity, or like a triangle? When we talk about a triangle in mathematics, triangles, all the inner angles add up to 180 degrees, and we're just talking about like the concept of a triangle. Does that have a purpose? And I'd say, yeah, that has a purpose too, right? Triangles have a role to play within the larger system they're a part of. That system of geometrical space, triangles have a role to play in that, squares have a role to play in that, rectangles have a role to play in that, right? All the different geometrical shapes, these abstract geometrical shapes, they all have a role to play within that system. And in that sense, they have a purpose. So I guess what I'm trying to say is anything I can think of, anything that I'm thinking of right now, at least, I can be like, yeah, it obviously has a purpose, meaning it has a role to play in that system. Even if it's a completely unconscious thing, like the concept of a triangle isn't like a being that's like, oh, I want to do this. Just like the pen isn't a being that's, conscious or aware. But it still has a role to play within the system that it's a part of. And that's what having a purpose is. And yeah, each thing can have many purposes because each thing has many roles that it can play in various systems. And so that's all fine on this view. So if we go back to what the proper work of wisdom is, it would be to kind of recognize this, right? To possess the order of the nature of the whole, to see how things fit together, which is to see the purpose of each thing, meaning the role that it plays within the system that it's part of, and the different roles that it plays within the different systems that it's part of, and then how those systems relate to each other, right? That's what wisdom, on her view, is after. It's about seeing how everything fits together. And to see that, you have to contemplate the purpose of things. Because the purpose tells me the role that each thing plays within the larger system or the larger whole of which it's a part.